Okay, I did want to go over something with you that I went over with you yesterday, and I wanted to go over it with you today, but I figured I'd just make a video of it. That way you can have this in your library of things you need to know about Java programming, particularly when you go to take the APCSA exam. So to recall, a couple of days ago I was talking about methods where you pass primitive types and they're copied versus methods where you pass objects by reference. So let's explore the two, and I went over this a couple of days ago, but I'll go over it again. So notice here I declare an integer n is equal to 5, and I'm going to call that method pass by copied, and there's that method there. So n comes integer n, and what I'll do is I'll add increment n by 10, and then I'll print it out. Once this method returns, though, this method has a copy of what was passed in. It does not have a reference. So whatever effect I make to n will only be seen within this method. Once I leave it, the value of n, the initial value of n here will still remain 5. Okay, so when I run this, it should print out 5 plus 10 is 15, and then it should print out 5. So let's see here. Oh, yep. So it printed out 15 because n came 5 and I added 10, and it printed 15, but when I came back it printed 5. So pass by copy. Primitive types are passed by copy. Now let's look at passing something by reference here. So here I am declaring an array of integers, and now is a more appropriate time to talk about this because we're working with arrays. Okay, so let me do this. So now what I've done, I've declared an array of integer type. There's 3 elements in that array, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to call this method pass by reference. I am passing the array, the integer array, or j, and then when I come out, I'll print out the first element of that array. So let's take a look at this method here. So here's pass by reference. So here's my integer array with a name of n. So I'll add to the first element 10. So let's see here. So the first element up here was 1. So when I add 10, it should print out 11. But then when I come back and print out the first element again, it should print out 11 because objects are passed by reference. In other words, whatever changes I make here in this method passed by reference will hold. All right, so here we go. So there you go, 11, 11. Difference between pass by copied, primitives are copied, and then objects are passed by reference. Now, let's look at what I was going over today. So I was talking about the for each loop, and you cannot add or remove elements within a for each loop. You cannot change values of elements within a for each loop, whether they are primitive data types or references to objects. You have no way to do that. So let's look at, okay, so here, what do I want to do? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I will declare an array of integers. So integer sum array, it will have elements 0, 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to call the method, but first let me go ahead and okay, comment that out. So let's take a look at the method demonstrate sum array. So I'm using the for each loop, right? So in comes that array, that integer array, which I call n array, and then I iterate through it. So for integer value, so that array has elements that are of integer. So integer value will be how I will reference each element in that array that I passed in. Okay, so n array is the array that I passed in. But notice here, there's no way that I could change the element. I could change the value of what's in some array. There's no way I can do that. You cannot change or remove. I would have no way to remove or add elements. Can't change them. Not within a for each loop. Can't do that. There's no way I'd be able to do that. But here, and so maybe this is where you get your money's worth. Actually, you don't spend money for this class. But it does say here, however, you can change an object if it is mutable by calling a mutator method on that object. And so what do we mean by a mutator method? Something that changes some property of that object, getters and setters. All right, so here we go. So I'll show you what that means. All right, so what I've done here, so let me comment this out, and then I'm going to uncomment this here. Okay, so what I have done is I have created a class called a mutable object. Right there, it's a mutable object. And I have a private instance variable. I have a constructor. I'm going to pass in a value into the constructor and assign it to my instance variable. And then I have a setter method. Okay, I will, so this method here is the parameter will be some value I'll pass in, and then I'll just add whatever I pass in to my instance value, to my property. So incremented by whatever value I have. And then I can also return the value that's stored in that object. Okay, return a value. So I have created a mutable object with getters and setters. Mutable. So what do they say? Mutable, mutator methods. If you were unclear what they were talking, if you were unclear what I said today. All right, so there's my class, my mutable object. Now let me go back here. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to instantiate create a mutable object, reference variable object 1, and when I create that object, I'll assign a value on that object 5. So if I go back here, so a value will be 5. And I'll create another mutable object, call it object 2, and then I'll assign a value of 10. And then mutable object 3, and assign it a value of 20. And then what I'll do is I'll create an array of mutable objects. Okay, so up here I have mutable objects. So notice here I have those brackets there. I'm creating an array of mutable objects. An array. Down here, line 27, 29 is just one single mutable object. But now I'm going to create an array of mutable objects. And then, so here, so objects equals new mutable object, and I'll create 3 of them. All right, I'll create 3. An array to hold 3 objects. To hold 3 mutable objects. Okay, and then so for the first element of that array, I'll assign object 1. And then for the next element, I'll assign object 2. And then for the next element, I'll assign object 3. So I have an array of mutable objects. Okay, and each of those mutable objects have mutator methods, setters and getters. Now, so I'm going to call then this method here, passing in my array of mutable objects, demonstrate 2. So here's demonstrate 2. Now, so n comes an array of mutable objects, which I call array of objects, and then for each method, so mutable object and object. Remember, this array of mutable objects has an array mutable object in it. So I have an array of mutable objects. So mutable object and object in the array of objects. Okay. Again, I'm working as I iterate through that array. I'm working with just a mutable object, and that array name is called an array of objects. Right? But now notice here, now I can actually change something about that mutable object by calling the mutator method or the setter method. I can go in object set change value. See up here, when I just said integer and array, there's nothing I can do to change the value of that array that was passed in. Absolutely nothing. But now here I can, because I've created an array of mutable objects, and I created setter and getter methods. See the difference? It says, however, you can change an object if it is mutable by calling a mutator method on that object. All right, so let's take a look at here. Then initially I gave the values of 5, 10, and 20. So I'm going to add 50 to each value, so I should have 55, 60, and 70 when I return from this function here, from demonstrate to. Alright, so I call that function, and then once I return, I'll do another for each loop, mutable objects, and then I'll print out the value of each of those objects that was in that class. I'll print out a value, return a value. And let's see here. Okay, so let's see. Voila, there you go, 50, 60, 70. Okay, so that's what was meant by that there. Within a for each loop, you cannot add or remove elements within a for each loop. You cannot change values of elements, even if they're primitive types or reference to object. However, you can change an object if it is mutable by calling a mutator method on that object. Right? So I hope that clarifies anything there. So.